At MedShield Medical Scheme, we don't just talk health, we do health. SMS MedShield to 33023 or talk to your broker to get your kind of care.
I researched it before going to buy the pills, what effects, what's the quickest to do, and how long will it take to digest in my system, and what do I need to do so that it processes very well. So I knew, okay, if I drink them and drink water and then sleep upright, it's gonna do a quicker process and starting being dizzy until I'm not found by anyone. But in my mind, it was that thing you would think, I've been neglected, I felt unloved, I felt unneeded. I didn't feel my necessity to be around anyone. My existence wasn't prior.
So by the end of today, approximately 230 people in South Africa will have attempted suicide. Of these, 23 will have succeeded. In other words, by the end of the show, one of these people will have succeeded. Now, suicide is said to be the third greatest cause of unnatural deaths in South Africa. And the obvious question is, why? What does it mean to be suicidal? What is that trigger that tips the person over, that making that decision to want to end his or her own life? How can you identify such a person? And can these people be helped, by the way? Well, these are the questions we'll address in today's show. We have experts who will help us unpack this problem of suicide and examine ways in which we can prevent and deal with it appropriately. We'll be joined in studio by a child and adolescent psychiatrist, a board member of SADC, a counseling services manager from Lifeline, and in our Cape Town studio, we have the spokesperson of Pharmadynamics. Now, you may want to be part of the show by asking the panel, some questions or simply just sharing your views with us. The number to call is Johannesburg 714-6918 or 6919. You could also tweet us at SABC Health Talk or simply interact with us on our Facebook page, SABC Health Talk. Now sit back, relax, and learn from this bumper show ahead. Coming to you just after a short break. I'm Dr. Seloma Taung, and this is Health Talk.
At MedShield Medical Scheme, we don't just talk health, we do health.
It's so good, nothing else can replace just your slightest embrace. And if you only would be my own for the rest of my days, I will whisper this phrase, my darling, c'est bon.
MedShield Medical Scheme doesn't just cover you when you're ill, we'll help you stay well.
Phones, cloud systems, and robots have taken over a lot of what used to be done manually.
Our accounting system is actually based on the cloud.
Google nowadays can tell you where you parked your car.
And Africa's entrepreneurs are using technology to create.
With Pocket Masipala, you can basically do all the services that you would do at the municipality physically by going there, but you can now do them on a mobile app.
Join me, Spumelele Zondi, on Sundays at 9 p.m. on SABC News.
As you may have heard, Chester Bennington, the lead singer of Linkin Park, was found dead at his own home in California after apparently taking his own life. The 41-year-old was discovered inside his house in Los Angeles. The LA coroner office confirmed that he had taken his own life. This is Busisiwe Yende, a 26-year-old from Soweto. Growing up, she was a shy young girl who had a bubbly and lovely childhood before she was visited by thoughts of taking her own life.
Growing, I was a very shy person at some points, and I learned how to overcome this shyness of me and learn to be confident, because I had a very low self-esteem. I didn't believe in myself. I felt like everything that I was doing was wrong until I picked up when I was in grade 7 in Kutumang. That's when I started having a lot of confidence.
For many people, having brief thoughts of suicide does happen every once in a blue moon. A passing thought that stems from a major disappointment, as with Busi, who was scared to disappoint her family.
I'm a person who's very scared of failure, so at that moment it was a period of me writing my exams, and it felt hard to come back ending to say, I didn't make it. I felt like my heart was too heavy. I could not carry it anymore, and I didn't want to talk to anyone about it, because I felt good explaining it is not gonna help. I just wanted to just end everything.
Before attempting suicide, Busisiwe didn't even realize she was depressed.
But I didn't know at first which it was depression until I attempted a suicide, and it was called depression. I didn't know what depression was. I didn't even understand the meaning because I felt with depression.
About 75% of people who attempt suicide give some kind of warning of their intention to a friend or family member. Symptoms of depression present themselves differently.
I was too moody. Wanted my own space, always crying, being distant to people, and things that I was used to doing, I was now no longer interested in them. My manner of approach with people was starting to be rude, and in most cases spend my time alone, do the cards, and just I was different. Now when I realize looking back, I see I was quite weird to the person that they normally knew blindly.
With the right diagnosis and treatment, depression recovery is possible, and talk therapy can also help you to understand your illness, overcome fears or insecurities. For Busisiwe, her road to recovery was through her foundation, KYA, Kilani Youth in Action.
With the events that I usually do for the community, that was actually my therapy, and as well as doing poetry and speaking to other people, having conversations, and that helped me to come back strong, and having the love and support now showing from different people, different sides of family members, to tell Luguti what I did was very wrong. I could have come and spoke to them, and which now I realize it was actually a selfish decision. It was a coward move for me to do.
All right, so let's learn more about this problem of depression, and it's a pleasure to welcome in studio our special guest. First up, closest to me is Dr. Helen Clark, who's a child and adolescent psychiatrist in practice both in the public and the private sector. Welcome to Health Talk, Doctor. All right, and of course, next to the doc, we have Ngini Pasha, who's no stranger to this show. Ngini is the board member of SADC, or South African Depression and Anxiety Group. Welcome to Health Talk once again.
Thank you. Good to be here.
All right, and in our Cape Town studio, we also have Nicole Jennings. Nicole is the spokesperson for Pharma Dynamics. Nicole, welcome to Health Talk.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. We're going to come back to you just in a while. And Nicole, let's start with you, Dr. Clark. Now, we're talking about, suicide. Let's just define these things so that we all know what we're talking about. There's often mention of suicide, attempted suicide, para-suicide, assisted suicide. What is the difference between all of these terms?
Well, essentially, suicide is taking action against yourself that results in the end of your life. And suicide is actually a completed gesture, so you do it and you succeed in killing yourself. Attempted suicide is where you take action against yourself with the intention of killing yourself, but you don't actually succeed.
Right.
Parasuicide is a gesture that looks like an attempt to commit suicide.
Okay.
And it looks like that to the people around you. Yeah. But in actual fact, it's a gesture, more an attempt at communicating, I'm in distress, I need help. But my intention isn't actually to kill myself, it's just to make sure that people understand that you need help.
That's an interesting one. So there's a fine line between para-suicide and attempted suicide.
Yes. They will present in the same way.
Right.
Often para-suicide will be a gesture that is not as serious as a suicidal gesture.
Right.
The tragedy of para-suicide is that sometimes they succeed.
Yeah.
Which is obviously not what the intention was,
right.
But it can happen.
I want to come back and, you know, I'd like us to discuss the methods that people use in both, I guess, or I suppose in all of them. But Ngiri, let's start talking statistics now. I presented, you know, the fact that by the end of today, 23 people will have killed themselves or will have committed suicide. How true is that, or how close is that to reality?
You know, well, I mean, if we look at WHO, which is the World Health Organization, I mean, they estimate that at least within 40 seconds, every 40 seconds, you know, someone will, you know, take away their lives. So it's showing us that, you know, globally it is really a huge problem. And we're bringing it closer to home in South Africa. In fact, we're saying 23, but, you know, that figure could actually be a lot more because, you know, remember that some families try to hide, so not everyone is actually included in those statistics. So right. shocking as they are, they could very well be quite conservative. Right. And we're looking at over 200 attempted suicides each day in our country. Right. You know, so it really is quite alarming. It is frightening.
But and even there, I mean, is that accurate statistics in terms of attempted suicides?
It is, because so remember, these are recorded.
Yeah.
You know, statistics.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, we saw in the inset, I mean, it's also affecting younger people, yeah. You know. So we are saying, I mean, about 2-3 years ago, we were saying that at least 9.5% of teen deaths in South Africa are due to suicide. You know, now, 2017, that figure has actually gone up. So it is on the increase. And I think also, you know, media has now come forth in terms of really reporting on most of these cases. So we're starting to see more and more of, you know, prominent sort of well-known, you know, people globally that actually have taken away their lives.
So is it the fact that they're being reported more, or are the rates going up?
It's both. You know, it's definitely is both. You know, we are certainly not seeing a decrease in suicides globally, and which is why, you know, the kind of statistics that even WHO is actually reporting on. So certainly, you know, it is on the increase, and I think, you know, being on media platforms such as Health Talk, you know, that goes a long way in really trying to empower the people, in trying to really educate and create that awareness to try and turn the tide.
Talk about awareness. Let's cross over to Cape Town and speak to Nicole. Now, Nicole, earlier, you know, in our discussion before the show, you said something about, you know, you guys being involved in some media campaign to educate the public around suicide. Do you want to perhaps just tell us a little more about that?
Yes, that's right. So as a company that does play in the central nervous system market, we do view it as our responsibility to also educate you know, people on the reality of mental illness. It is a reality that in South Africa, suicide and mental illness in general is still very stigmatized. And that's why we engage in a very active media campaign, and we also create supportive platforms that maybe we can touch on a bit later to destigmatize mental illness. We find that so many people are just too ashamed to put up their hand and to say, I struggle with a mental illness. And that often is the reason that they're not able to access the treatment, the medication, and the help that they need to go on the road to recovery.
All right. I'm going to come back, and I'd like us to unpack that a little more. But let's come back to you, Dr. Clark. In your experience, I mean, you're a child and adolescent psychiatrist. Nkini just made mention of the fact that, there's a whole lot more young people attempting suicide. What is your experience in terms of, the young people?
I think increasingly, as there is more and more pressure on adolescents, more and more pressure on them to achieve, to perform, and as the family, as a structure, starts to disintegrate, and the structures that are supposed to be supporting our children and our adolescents start to fall apart, and adolescents are starting to try and have to cope on their own. The distress levels in our adolescents and our children as well are becoming greater, and they're starting to have to cope very much on their own. And there's a problem with communication with parents who stress themselves. They just can't access.
Right.
And
we're going to unpack that a little more in terms of, the risk factors behind all of this. But essentially you're saying we're seeing a lot more of these attempts.
We're seeing more
attempts
in adolescence, but what I think people probably aren't aware of is that we're starting to see a lot of ideation and even attempts in children. People tend to think that children don't have a concept of death, but increasingly in our children, they are developing a concept of death. They may not understand the whole concept, but they know what death is, and they experience extreme distress, and they know death is the ultimate escape. And we are seeing increasingly in the last while children who are reported as presenting with completed suicide, which is a source of extreme concern.
That's a scary one indeed. Let's talk about methods that are used commonly. Obviously, we're not promoting suicide, but I mean, what are those, let's call them effective methods that are commonly used?
And I mean, I actually like when you say we're not promoting that, but, in the inset, we also saw, from the young lady that was telling her story, that she actually went and researched. So very often, people that are thinking of taking away their lives, they will go and research. They will try and find which is the best method. And I think in this day and era of technology and access to the internet and really reaching the world at your fingertips, that has also created and increased in a way sort of the access to different ways and ideas in terms of how you can actually take away your lives. But generally we find that females will tend to use lesser, harsher or lesser aggressive methods to taking away their lives, like taking an overdose, versus where you look at males, which they will tend to use and resort to more aggressive methods like shooting themselves, hanging themselves, even, suffocating themselves by obviously, gassing themselves and those kind of things. But obviously, this is dynamic because as more and more information becomes available and people are researching and seeing that which way it will be the quickest manner. Even jumping off, I mean, recently there was a story of a vet student, which is around the corner from where we are, that jumped off a building, and plunged to their death. So we are seeing that actually that picture also is changing because, females are also looking at more aggressive methods because they want to make sure that that attempt actually is successful, and that they don't find themselves having to come back and face, the guilt and face, the judgment and the discrimination because they have attempted to take away their lives.
And I think what people aren't aware of is the fact that those that attempt suicide or even are successful at suicide actually leave behind lots and lots of problems and broken hearts. But that after the break. Please stay with us.
If we're talking health, then let's talk seriously.
It's so good nothing else can replace just your slightest embrace. And if you only would be my own for the rest of my days, I will whisper this phrase, my darling, c'est si bon.
MedShield, embracing our members in good health since 1968.
Show me a greater power on the whole continent of Africa. Show me a greater power anywhere.
6th of June 1918 was the establishment of our movement to maintain that.
We need to do something about the educational upliftment of the Afrikaner, and we also need to do something about the economic upliftment of the Afrikaner. And that was the two main goals at that stage in 1918.
The Broederbond never was a cultural organization. It was a state-capturing organization. It is, in fact...
I like that term.
It has captured the financial systems. It has captured the parastatals. It has captured cultural organizations.
For all your constitutional and legal matters, tune into Rights and Recourse on Sundays between 2 and 3 Central African Time.
Welcome back. We're talking suicide with our special guests. First up, Dr. Helen Clark, who's a child and adolescent psychiatrist, Nkini Pasha, board member at SADC, and we're now joined by Nicole Immerman. Nicole is the Counseling Services Manager at Lifeline. Welcome to Health Talk, Nicole.
Hi, thank you.
All right. Before we start our discussion, let's take Anonymous on the line from Kempton Park. Anonymous, welcome.
Hello?
Yes, Anonymous, go for it.
Hi, yes. I'm phoning from Kempton Park and I'm busy watching your show.
Yes.
And, yeah, I have tried to do this before, so it's not a first. But I'm currently at a point in my life where I really and truly can't take it anymore. You know what, I just think it's the easiest way out.
Okay, Anonymous, obviously this is a disturbing call, but I'd like you to please just stay tuned, because at some point we're going to give out some numbers, because I really think that you need some help. You need to talk to someone.
I don't think you know how serious this is.
Yeah.
I'm sitting with 60 tablets in my hand that I'm going to just drink with a glass of water, and what must be must be. I just had enough. I can't take it.
Yeah. If I could just appeal to you to please just hold on. You just need to speak to somebody. There's no problem that's insurmountable. So we're going to give out some numbers, and perhaps let's hear from our guests here.
I would urge you, Anonymous, to please, suicide, it really is not a solution. If maybe one of our producers can get their number and immediately get someone from our office, the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, to engage with her immediately, because that is not a solution at all. There are alternatives. We will be able to really hold your hand and help you through this, what seemingly to you might be the end of the road, but really it's not. Suicide, it's not the solution. So if maybe we can get, our producers to get in touch.
I think our producers will try and speak to him and get obviously he needs some sort of help urgently.
Urgently, and we cannot rely, chances are that if we leave it up to her to call, that's not going to happen because she is at that point, just, right on the edge, of taking away her life.
All right. All right. And for anybody else who's watching, obviously the numbers are on the screen. If you need to speak to someone, please dial those numbers that are on your screen right now. Let's continue our discussion and speak to Nicole. Nicole, I've had a long chat with these two guests here, and let's give you some chance to... Perhaps let's start with looking at the impact. In my introduction, I said that, those that succeed and those that don't succeed leave behind some huge impact, firstly on themselves, if they survive, of course, and of course, and to those around them. Your comments on that?
I think in terms of speaking about impact, the call that we just received, when somebody is in a place of suicide, the impact of that is that feeling of that desperation that you were talking about, of feeling that there's no hope, that I'm in this deep, dark hole, and that this is my only way out. So I think the one impact of suicide and thoughts around suicide would be that feeling of this is my only option. And as you were saying, in that moment, that's all that there is, and not realizing that there may be that sense of hope. So that would definitely be one of the major impacts of feeling like you're in this deep dark hole and you being swallowed. In terms of attempting a suicide and then discovering that you haven't succeeded, people can feel many things. Some people report that they sometimes feel a sense of relief, that their life changed, that they were in this dark place, and now it's almost like an opportunity to look at things differently, to be able to reach out. And it's a time where people know what they're going through. So that could be one of the impacts. Sometimes people feel incredibly angry. They feel like, I wanted to kill myself and I haven't succeeded. And what we do find is sometimes there are reports saying, well, I can't even get this right, because there's a sense of, I can't do anything right. There's a sense of, I'm not good enough.
Right. Okay. Let's take another anonymous on the line from Johannesburg this time. Anonymous, welcome.
Welcome, sir. How are you?
We're good. How are you, sir?
I'm fine. My concern is about promises. I'm from military veteran.
Yes.
Now, we've got promises like our benefits are housing, health, care, but we don't get those things. Yesterday, I was in the public protector's office, still there. I didn't get help because presently I don't have place to stay, and I fought for this country. So I need help before I take my gun and kill myself. And I've got 4 children and 2 grandchildren. I love those children. Please, I need help.
Okay. Anonymous, we've heard you. Like with the previous caller, we're going to try and get your numbers and try and get someone to speak to you immediately.
And you know the scary part with this call as well, it brings another dimension, is that of family suicides. You know, where as the head of the family, not only do you feel or do you decide to take away your life, but also you take away, you know, you wipe out your family. Because as men, there is this, you know, masculinity gold standard that if I'm not around, nobody can take care of my family. So it is my responsibility. I wipe them out and then turn the gun on myself. And we are seeing more and more of those cases as well being reported.
And it's really unfair on the children.
It is unfair, you know, on the children. It is unfair because, I mean, they still have their whole future, you know. But just also going back to the impact, I think if you look at the increase in statistics, you know, in our young children, it means that in a number of years, you know, to come, we're not going to have future leaders. You know, if we are seeing this increasing trend in young people that decide to take away their lives, they're cutting their lives short. It's impacting, obviously, on the growth and, you know, sustainability of our country. And, you know, I think that as well is a huge impact, you know, if one looks at it from a societal, you know, perspective.
Dr. Clark, I mean, in your interaction with these young ones and adolescents who would have attempted suicide, the impact on the family surrounding, you know, the family behind these. Your comments?
I think one has to look at it from 2 perspectives. First of all, the adolescent that attempts suicide. It's very clear that in many cases, having a child that attempts suicide, it is the most frightening experience that a parent can go through. Very often there's no awareness that there's a problem. There's no insight into the fact that the adolescent is having any problems. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, there's this attempt on their lives. They are frightened. They're frightened to let the adolescent out of their sight. They no longer trust the adolescent. And a lot of the journey thereafter is building trust again. And that can be a very long journey. I think it's important also for adolescents to understand the impact of a completed suicide on a family, because it is a momentary act often by an adolescent, but it's a life experience for a family. It is something that a family will never be able to resolve. It's often something that it's never possible to totally understand. You will never understand why this action has occurred. It is something that you will never be able to totally process. There is a gap that you will never be able to fill. And it is something that will just carry on and on being. And I think one should never underestimate the impact on the family. And this is something that I think we work on with our adolescents who have attempted suicide, is discussing this kind of thing with them and the responsibility they take in working on issues related to suicidality.
And you can imagine as a parent also that sense of failure. You know, you feel that you have failed your child. You feel that you are not a good parent. You feel that, you know, so there's guilt. So really it also starts, you know, in terms of just the emotional and psychological well-being, you know, of the parents and those that are around, you know, that young person or even another family member that have decided to take away their lives.
All right, let's go for a quick break. We'll come back and perhaps just focus on understanding the risk factors. You know, what is it that drives people to that point where they want to take their own lives? Please stay with us.
At MedShield Medical Scheme, we don't just talk health, we do health.
It's so good, nothing else can replace just your slightest embrace. And if you only would be my own for the rest of my days, I will whisper this phrase, my darling, c'est bon.
MedShield Medical Scheme doesn't just cover you when you're ill, we'll help you stay well.
We pump up your energy, keeping you in action through sports updates while resting at home. This is what's happening in your world of sport every weekend.
In the second half, Kolisi and Jaco Kriel combined well, and Kolisi scored his second try. He was also named man of the match.
Confusion from the West defenders gifted Patosi with a close-range goal.
In the 10th round, he pinned a visibly fatigued McGregor on the ropes and hammered the Irishman before the referee stepped in to stop the bout.
He's a tough competitor. He's a lot more experienced, especially in the layer.
Keep it locked on Sports Live every Saturday and Sunday at 20:30.
Welcome back, and thank you so much for staying with us. We're talking suicide with our special guest, Dr. Helen Clark, child and adolescent psychiatrist, Mr. Kirim Pasha, who's board member of SADC, and in our Cape Town studio, Nicole Jennings, spokesperson for Pharmadynamics. Now, before we start our discussion, let's take another anonymous from Johannesburg. Anonymous, welcome. Anonymous, are you there?
Good afternoon, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
I'm a cancer patient. I'm on stage 4. And I look like a swollen woman that's giving birth any time now. I just feel everything is just turning around me that I don't want to go on chemotherapy anymore. I would like them to do an operation, but they say to me it's a bit dangerous. But I mean, I can't be walking like this for almost 2 years. So I'm just looking at all my tablets and everything. because January I'll be back in hospital again doing chemotherapy. So I feel I need help because it just can't go on.
Okay. Anonymous, please, we urge you to just hold on. Just stay there. We're going to come back to you, and somebody will be in touch with you immediately. Okay. Dr. Clark, let's come back to our discussion in terms of just trying to understand who's at risk. I know we've touched on bits and pieces of this, but let's just try and unpack it further now, looking at the common risk factors for suicide.
I think it's fairly obvious that people who are suffering from depression and anxiety would obviously be at risk. The presentation of severe depression, severe anxiety, places you at risk for suicide. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that quite a lot of the time, suicide is an impulsive gesture, not necessarily associated with a sustained pattern of depression. And often it's just the culmination of a lot of stresses that have been occurring in your life. And we find this very commonly with our adolescents, that they're just carrying a lot of things that have been going on in their lives. They are coming from backgrounds where there is a lot of stress. There may be family conflict, domestic violence. There may be histories of abuse. A lot of our kids, when they come into us, they've had histories of sexual abuse. There's chaos in their families. Families have disintegrated, fallen apart. We see problems with where there's been divorce, where children are stuck in the middle of divorce. And what happens is you've got these very stressed kids who are then just, one little thing happens, one thing more happens, and the whole thing blows. So it's basically the lifestyle that our children and adolescents and adults are following. And then one little thing happens and the whole thing boils over.
Nkini, I'm going to come back to you because I'd like us to talk a little more about, family dynamics. But I need to just go across to Cape Town and speak to Nicole. Nicole, I do know that, in our discussion you said something about, you having a program called, is it Let's Talk? Just tell us a little more about that.
Yes, that's right. So the Let's Talk platform is an online platform, and it's a bit of an intervention because for a lot of people it's not easily accessible to go to a registered psychiatrist, for example. In fact, there's only one registered psychiatrist available for every 100,000 South Africans that struggle with mental illness. And so the Let's Talk platform is basically there for people to share their stories, for a community to exist between people that struggle with mental illness. We've also got some lovely recipes there. There is some evidence that suggests that a certain lifestyle changes, and specifically diet, can have a mood-boosting effect. I just want to mention there that that is in no way a replacement for medication, but it is important to take care of a diet and to make sure that you follow a healthy lifestyle for depression. And then just to add, when it comes to the risk factors, in South Africa specifically, when we look at young people, students, for example, not only do our students have to deal with general stresses that are associated with exams, but they also have protests on campus, victimization. We are in a situation, unfortunately, where there are so many other factors that add to the trauma and the stress of young people. And that's why it's so important for people to be able to talk about it, for people to support each other, and to create a community for people who struggle with mental illness.
And especially around this time when we're looking at exams, hey? So let's take, I believe we have another Anonymous, this time from Cape Town. Anonymous, welcome to Health Talk.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I've just spoken to one of the consultants explaining to them about my situation. 7 times I've tried to commit suicide, first at the age of 9. Recently was a month ago when my dad was in hospital. They sent me to a mental hospital, and I was let out on Friday, and just 2 hours later it passed. It's suicide still crosses my mind. And at work, I'm not coping. So I decided to quit my job today. At this stage, I don't know what to do. I find myself just bursting out in tears. I get anxiety attacks nowadays. I see a therapist. I see a psychiatrist. I'm on medication, but nothing seems to be helping.
Okay. Anonymous, Anonymous, all I can say to you is that suicide is definitely not the answer, but I urge you to please just stay tuned. Someone is going to come to you now and speak to you immediately and try and see if we can get some help to you. Right, do you want to comment on that, Nkini?
I mean, certainly, it really does sound like there is a lot of underlying, depression, life, traumatic, experiences. And of course, we know that there is a very strong link between depression, and suicide. So really, I think, as we said, that, Anonymous, please, our producer is going to get in touch with you. There is help. You don't have to actually walk through this path alone. There are alternatives, and we'll be able to definitely help you. And also, remember with medication as well, it could be that the dose that, she's on is not effective enough, or even the option, whether it's an antidepressant or it's an anxiolytic. So we may need to look at whether, changing and tweaking the therapy that she is on, but also a combination of medication as well as psychotherapy has been proven globally to be quite effective in, managing and treating, these kind of conditions.
Yeah. Just quickly, Nicole, back in Cape Town, your last word, because I think, look, we're getting all these calls. Clearly, this is a problem. Your last few words?
Yes, so if I can just finish off by saying that I think with depression still being so stigmatized in the country, it's important to understand that it is a real disease as any other disease, such as heart disease, for example, and there really is no shame in speaking up and in seeking help if you do feel that you are struggling with a mental illness. So if I can just give the URL for the intervention, Let's Talk, it's www.letstalkmh.co.za, where people can share their story. We also sponsor one of the SADC helplines, and we have got the number available there on the website. There's also some lovely webinars from trained psychiatrists, just giving patients advice on some of the general mental conditions. And then there's an opportunity to share your story and to get some support and interact with other people in a similar situation.
All right. Okay. Nicole Jennings, spokesperson from Pharmadynamics, thank you so much for your time. All right, time for another quick commercial break. When we come back, we now talk about, how do we treat and support those people affected by suicide in one way or the other. Please stay with us.
If we're talking health, then let's talk seriously.
It's so good, nothing else can replace just your slightest embrace. And if you only would be my own for the rest of my days, I will whisper this phrase, my darling, c'est bon.
MedShield, embracing our members in good health since 1968.
We Cross Live, give updates and cover sport.
The observer missions, what are they saying?
It will be a very difficult announcement to make, to say whether these elections have been free and fair.
1 in every 100 people are diagnosed with arthritis daily. In an effort to raise awareness, a handful of elderly women, they took to the streets of Soweto to stretch their fight against the ailment.
Western Province upset the Sharks by 33 points to 21 to be crowned the 2017 Currie Cup champions at the Kings Park Stadium.
In Durban,
On time with weather every hour, all the time. For all news, stay tuned to AM News every Saturday and Sunday at 10:00 hours Central African Time.
Welcome back, and thank you so much for staying with us. We're talking the suicide, with our guest, Dr. Helen Clark, child and adolescent psychiatrist in Kini Pasha, board member from SADC. And back with us is Nicole Immerman, counseling services manager at Lifeline. Now, if we can even talk about prevention, perhaps let's start. And I would imagine it starts with the ability to recognize that somebody is either at risk of committing suicide or about to. How do we handle such a situation? Let's start with you, Dr. Clark.
I think your first line is to recognize when people are depressed.
Right.
When you're starting to lose people to depression, where people are becoming sad, where people are becoming hopeless, irritable, where you see a change in the person from the person that they were before. People are starting to lose a sense of future, preoccupied with negative, talking about dying and death, where people are starting to have changes in their normal body habits, complaining of not being able to sleep, stopping eating, just being tired and not having energy. When people are just changing and they're just not the same person that they were before.
Right.
It doesn't have to be sadness, it can be irritability, agitation. And when they start talking as if they might not be here tomorrow, as if they're almost telling you that maybe they won't be here, and almost saying goodbye in some kind of way. This kind of final type communication can be a way of signaling that they might be thinking about something like this. And it's very important to pick up on that kind of thing, and to start asking questions when you think that there might be something like this going on. Because it's often the case that it's a very alone space, this kind of space. Right. It's extremely difficult to talk about it. You feel that you shouldn't be talking about it. It's something hidden, something you shouldn't talk about. And it's something that's very freeing often to ask someone and give them the opportunity to actually come out and say, yes, this is something that I'm thinking about.
All right. Let's take another anonymous, this time from Johannesburg. Yes, anonymous, welcome.
Good day. I just want to ask something. I've been put on permanent disabilities, and I have submitted a letter before to Discovery Clinic to get help with the psychiatrist. But up until today, they have never called me back for any appointment as such. And it's just been very hard because of the disability. Is there anybody that will be able to just help me?
Okay, Anonymous, we're battling to hear, but I think there was talk of disability.
And I mean, certainly as a South African Depression and Anxiety Group, you know, part of the work that we do is that as well of advocacy. So not only do we offer support in terms of, you know, the mentally ill, patients or people in our society, but also to offer that. So I think let, Anonymous get in touch with us as a South African Depression and Anxiety Group, and we'll be able to assist you in, channeling you to the right direction in order to get this process, completed and concluded. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Let's continue our discussion. I mean, this is really a sad topic to start with, but yeah, sure. I mean, how do we help those people that are at risk? I think we started off by saying recognize that people are about to do something, so that you then are able to ask the right sort of questions, obviously with a view to channeling them to for them to get help. And then from there, I mean, how do we assist? How do we interact with these people?
I think it would be, it's almost like bearing in mind the 3 L's. So it would be the looking for the signs that something is happening for that person and that they are at risk. And then asking them if they are thinking about suicide, because often that's quite scary. It's quite a scary place to go into, and it is a relief, as you were saying, Dr. Clark, to be able to say, yes, this has been on my mind. And then being able to listen, to really hear what they are going through and understanding where they're coming from. Because suicide is often not spoken about, and when we get to hear what is happening for a person, we can then look at the 3rd L of where do we link these people. So is it an emergency situation where they need to go to a hospital? Is it something around advocacy? Would it maybe be for the family system or for family members to come and talk about what this is like for me, or to deal with somebody in my life who's thinking about suicide and I don't know how to help them? So the resources would depend on the particular situation in the case.
Right. And we spoke earlier about, family dynamics, and how they come into being, and there's issues of stigma, myths around all of these. How do we deal with this in a family setup? Because I think that's important.
Some of the cultural myths, I mean, in some of the languages, I'm Northern Sotho, I'm Pedi, so, there's idioms, like, that goes like, Mipulai halelu. So basically meaning that if someone takes away their lives, they're not worthy to be mourned. And I mean, that's loosely translated. But that goes to show just the understanding and the lack of awareness and the education around, suicide. So I think education is very, very key. Even in family, structures, and large, within the society as well, so that people understand that when somebody takes away their lives, there is a pathology, linked to it. I always like to put it this way, that when somebody commits suicide or attempts suicide, parts of their brains, a brain is an organ in our body, like you have the heart, you have, other organs, your kidneys and so forth. Parts of your brain that actually are responsible to assisting you to positively, deal with your environment and exist within that environment, shuts down. And therefore you become hopeless, you become helpless. So your brain does no longer function in a normal manner that it should. And that is then why that ultimately that person will take away their life. So suicide is a severe consequences of underlying untreated type of a mental disorder like depression, like anxiety disorder. Life challenges are also quite critical. So very often as human beings, as people, we're trying to keep up with the Jones. We don't want to talk about our problems, financial problems. It's all about material. So there is this extreme pressure, in society that I want to be seen to be successful. I want to be seen to be driving a certain type of a car. And when you then get into that huge debt, and now you cannot afford to sustain that debt, you then, plunge into that dip. And it's important for people to understand that, there are solutions. Taking away your life is not the ultimate, solution. And substances as well, to try and cope. So the more you use alcohol, recreational drugs, they also actually exacerbate and make your condition even worse.
Even worse, yeah. So those that have attempted suicide clearly are at risk of, being successful the next time around. How do we support those?
It's tremendously important for us, first of all, to look at helping people to sort out some of the issues that caused them to make the first attempt. But very often it's about coping skills, developing coping skills to cope with my world, understanding what it was that led me to the attempt that I made, and then learning new coping skills to take me into the future. How am I going to learn in the future to deal with stress? And how am I going to learn in the future to deal with the overwhelming emotions that I'm going to have at certain times? And take that knowledge out and work with it. And I think it's tremendously important also that in addition to working with the person who has attempted, that we work with peer groups to educate our peer groups to say, what would you do if somebody said to you, I want to kill myself?
Nicole, last 30 seconds, your last word.
I think the going into schools is a big thing that we're finding, and it's talking around many topics. It's about suicide, and it would be some of the risk factors. In schools, there's a lot of bullying of children, so it's speaking about topics related to that, about topics related to peer pressure. There's many things that can contribute, and being able to open up a forum like we're doing today to talk about suicide in terms of the prevention.
I just so wish we had enough time, but unfortunately that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for your contribution. And yeah, so folks, it's on that note that we end our show today. And thank you so much for staying with us, and you know, and all the calls that we've received. And once again, please, all the callers that have called us today, please just stay there. You know, somebody will get in touch with you, and you will get help. And the rest of us, if you've missed any of our previous shows, you can always download them on YouTube. My name is Dr. Sello Mutaung, and until next time, same time, you please do take care.
MedShield, embracing our members in good health since 1968. SMS MedShield to 33023 or talk to your broker to get your kind of care.